I'm Seth,
I'm Ariana.
and this is the Pop Cult Podcast. And you might be wondering why you didn't hear our typical opening theme song. Well, Spotify for Podcasters, which is the service I was using to upload my segments and then edit them together, has removed the ability to edit things. So the theme that I had created through some sort of AI thing didn't cost me any money or take a lot of time, is now lost to the ether. So you'll be hearing some new music. I've had to figure out how to put together the podcast in a slightly different way, but it should still be available to you wherever it is you listen to podcasts if you're listening right now. Today, we have a very interesting episode. We are going to be looking at the two children's films of George Miller. One of his children's films is a sequel, and we hadn't seen the original, so I figured it'd be better to start there. So we will be talking about Happy Feet. Yes, Happy Feet was written, directed, and produced by the man who created Mad Max. And then before we talk about that, we're going to talk about another movie he did that was a sequel, Babe, Pig in the City, which he also wrote, directed, and produced. And they are very much George Miller movies.
Yes, they are.
So for Babe, he has just won a shepherding contest at the end of the last film. Farmer Hoggett refuses to make money using the pig's fame, though. However, an unexpected injury occurs that puts Farmer Hoggett in bed long-term, recovering. The bank comes a-calling about the payments on the land, so Mrs. Hoggett and Babe have to head to the city in order to raise funds, in order to repay that loan and keep the farm as theirs. And that's the premise of the movie, essentially. Ariana, before we talk about Babe, Pig in the City, I want to talk about our relationship with George Miller's work. So I have had you watch the first three Mad Max movies in preparation for Fury Road, which we've seen Fury Road twice.
Yes.
We have also seen The Witches of Eastwick, which he, I think, at least directed. I don't know how much. He probably wrote it, which was Jack Nicholson, Cher, Susan Sarandon, Michelle Pfeiffer.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't as big a fan of that movie, but
I still loved it.
Yeah, it's still a unique thing. That's all its own. And then also Lorenzo's Oil, also with Susan Sarandon. I think it was William Hurt as the husband, possibly. You're thinking of John Hurt, I bet, when I said that. William Hurt is he would it'd be a long. I could bring up. You're never gonna get it. I realize who I'm speaking to here. I would have to show the photographs, but you know who he is.
Yeah.
Which was based on a real life story of, I forget the disease, but it was this oil that caused like the muscle tremors to calm down. But it was like really intensely emotional. But that's kind of like George Miller does. And then most recently, we had seen 3,000 Years of Longing with Tilda Swinton and Idris Elba, which was okay.
Yeah, it was fine.
So we'd seen, we know who George Miller is. We know his style, but we had never seen any of his children's movies. And I'm going to argue at one point that Happy Feet might not be a kid's movie, but we'll get there when we get there. Babe, Pig in the City. I want you to take me through how you felt when the movie started, how you felt in the middle of the film, and then how you felt when the end credits were rolling.
So at the beginning of the film, I was increasingly stressed. I think because in the first Babe film, it's a little bit more cozy. It's this pig trying to who gets adopted by the dogs and who is rejected by the father figure.
It's very pull at your heartstrings.
Yeah. And this one, I felt way more stressed out because I think Animals in Peril really does that to me.
And these are real animals, not CG animals.
No, they're not CG animals. And I think I get also stressed out at the idea of what the training or the situation is
for these
animals.
You're sort of processing on a meta level of the filmmaking.
Yes. Yeah. And the thing is, this film is not supposed to make you feel comfortable and cozy. It is supposed to make you feel as if what Babe is supposed to feel, which is he's out of his element. He was very secure himself in the farm, but in the city, he's dealing with different dynamics.
Well, they had to, because in the first movie, he's out of his element when he goes to the farm because he was born as a factory farm pig.
Yes.
So they basically ratcheted it up to, okay, he now is used to the farm. What would be uncomfortable for somebody used to a farm?
Yes.
A massive city.
And during the film, it became this weird realization of, oh shit, this is something beyond what I thought it was.
This is
This
beyond a
is
children's
this
film.
is beyond a children's film. This is something that it is obviously wrapped around with this idea that you want the parents and whoever else is watching the film with the kids to enjoy it. It touches on death. It touches on being out of place.
It touches on what it means to be human,
Yes.
on like class division,
Yes.
and it's all done so well. And yeah, the death thing. There's this like ever-present threat looming over everything, and I think it started with the Farmer Hoggett well scene.
Yeah, it's like there is this concern that he died.
The way it's shot, I mean, he
Yes.
could have died.
And I think it was this thing that like it's one thing that I need to touch is I realized George Miller is a big impact on my childhood because I used to watch this. I think it's like the third Mad Max film
Under the Thunder or Beyond Thunderdome.
where he's with the kids.
He's just a raggedy man.
Yes, I watched that a ton of times as a child. Probably a film I wasn't supposed to watch, but I watched it a ton of times as a child.
Two men enter, one man leaves. I'm sure that was the favorite of your brothers, right?
And then like the witches of
Eastwick.
Eastwick, like there are like images burned into my brain because of this man. And watching this film and then looking as we are towards like how much they got into Metacritic, how much they got in like Rotten Tomatoes, how much did they
People
got.
don't get this movie.
I am upset.
If this movie came out now, it would be A24 would have put it out.
Because I feel like I was probably 13 when this film came out.
It was 98.
Yeah. So there was a time that I think that people would be like, oh, they don't make the films like Land Before Time anymore. They don't make the films like American Tail where the kids are sobbing.
They don't have anything on this movie, man.
Had me stressed the fuck out. It got to the point that I was just like, what the ever loving fuck? Like when Babe is being followed by these junkyard dogs.
Well, chased,
right?
It is an intense chase sequence.
Like these, like, and it is so intense because it's like these scenes from the prior film, but that are done so well that they're quick, and they're like, it's like as Babe imagined his short life flash before his eyes.
We're talking about Roscoe Lee Brown, who he was the narrator in the first one, a black like actor, very distinct voice. I think he did a lot in theater. Perfect narration voice. Like he has the gravitas to like just for everything to hit. And you said it felt like you were watching a really well-written children's book come to life on screen.
Yes,
because of the chapter breaks that they did.
It was a chapter book.
Which were in the first movie, but I think work even better here.
Oh yes, and it's just there. And then there's like this. Of course, the whimsy is still there. What I love is that when Babe looks out into the city, the first time they get there with like the farmer's wife, it is all the big cities put into one.
Sydney Opera House, Eiffel Tower, the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge. So immediately you're like, oh, they're signaling something to us. Anything could happen. Yeah. We're in a fantasy world where anything is possible.
Yeah, and so it's one of those fantasies that can like you can understand why everybody has these different accents, but they have no confusion as to they're from the same location.
And the city's never named.
The city is never named. Esme Hoggett, which is like the farmer's wife, is so funny and endearing in this film.
Yeah.
I love how her character changes from being like, oh, this pig, to just being like, this pig is the most important pig in the world to me. And like the overprotectiveness that falls into her because she's like, this is my Arthur's pig. Like she loves her husband. So in extension, she has to love this
He
pig.
becomes their child.
Yes.
And I think it makes sense because there really isn't a story to tell between James Cromwell and Babe anymore. That was the story of the first movie.
Yeah.
They now have a bond. He loves Babe. Babe loves him. There's no more conflict between them. So if you want Babe to have conflict with a human, the wife makes the most sense.
Yes.
And I'm sure it was probably like scheduling and things like that as to why Cromwell couldn't be in the whole movie, but that worked out perfectly. It
Because I
works.
feel like he would have reasoned himself out of like the situations that she ends up in.
Yeah, he's too calm to do these
Yeah,
things.
and it's supposed to be like this, this woman that I love, like when she's taken away by the police, she's like, but I'm a grandmother. Like,
It is an ACAB movie.
oh yeah, because she goes around looking for Babe, who's like actually still in the hotel. He's just in another room being trapped by the circus monkeys or like the clown performer monkeys.
Apes, they're not monkeys.
They're apes. What I love is like she starts going around shouting, "Pig, pig, 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 pig!"
And there's all these like bike cops out.
And there's these cops that are staring at her, and she's like, "Not you, pig, another pig." And she's like, "I'm not helping the situation." Um,
So originally when this movie was going to come out, like the initial trailer showed it as rated PG.
yeah.
But then when it finally was released, they had edited it down to a G. If you watch this movie, this feels like a PG movie, and that has me fascinated to know what got edited out. Like, what did they play down? There is literally a sex worker poodle in this movie.
Yeah.
They don't like, and it's not even implied. It's like straight up, oh, she's like a prostitute who's a dog.
Yeah. I think oh God, it's just the reason that I'm like mashing up was just like I love this film. I loved it in a way that I did not expect to love it. I was just ready to watch this film thinking it was just, oh, it's gonna be a cute child film because Babe 1 is really good.
Yeah, I think Babe's a good movie.
But Babe 2,
better than Babe. It is one of the rare cases of a sequel surpassing the original. I think the aesthetics are very interesting in that it's very dark. The tone can be nihilistic in a lot of points.
Yeah.
It reminded me of, there's a little bit of like Tim Burton in there. There's also a lot of Barry Sonnenfeld, who directed the Addams Family movies and Men in Black.
Yes.
And like he did Throw Mama from the Train.
Mhm.
And he has this kind of like dark comedy sensibility, which you could feel here. Like Miller is a smart enough director that he knows he can't make this just a pitch black comedy, but he knows he can insert dark humor in there and still make it like palatable for children where they're not going to be scared. You can clearly see the filmmaking connections between this movie and Fury Road. And funny enough, Fury Road was going to be his next film on his docket, but there were complications in scheduling, and then he ended up doing Happy Feet next instead. So we almost got George Miller transitioning to a children's film director for like the rest of his career. But I can see the filmmaking connections between the two.
Like like of course he made like the Mad Max series. He knows a good chase. And by God, in every film,
in this and Happy Feet, the chases are
so good because he doesn't remove any like tension. Like he doesn't go, "Oh, this is a children's film. It's supposed to be like less tension." He's like, "I'm gonna wrap up the tension. You're gonna see from behind, like like in front of Babe, and see behind, and just be terrorized at the fact that like you're kind of like, okay, is he gonna get caught? Because I feel like he's going to get fucking caught." And
he's not afraid to embrace peril.
Yes.
And let the audience think that these characters could die. Like, this is a dangerous situation, and like there's a big risk here. And so it invests you in the chase scenes rather than just being like noise and spectacle on screen. The suspenders balloon sequence at the big dinner, the charity dinner at the end.
So good.
Visual connection with Mad Max. The pole benders. Remember the guys who scale those poles and they're kind of bending them back and forth to get onto Furiosa's rig?
That's when he's like being like behind one of the cars and
in Road Warrior and stuff. Yeah. And so it's like, I realized George Miller greatly appreciates a practical acrobatics performance.
Yes.
He loves, and that's why we'll talk more about this in Happy Feet about, well, we'll talk about it a little bit here, but I think there's few directors working today who have nailed the balance between when it should be practical, when it should be digital, and when it is digital, how to hide the seams.
Yes.
Because that was something if you look at the behind the scenes work on Fury Road, there is far more there digital than you realize. but you can't see it because he understands lighting, he understands blocking, he understands all these pieces of cinematography in order to make a shot look how you want it and to really engross the audience.
Yes.
And he doesn't, it would be so easy for him to slack off on a kid's film, right? The expectations are so low on children's entertainment, but he doesn't. He is as committed to this as he is to any other film he's ever made.
Yeah, and I feel like this style of children's like or family film
It's gone.
is gone because I think about like that film that we ended up watching with our niece and nephew that had to do like these two brothers get a house. There's a
Mouse Hunt.
Mouse Hunt.
That was Gore Verbinski who directed the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
So there's a style there that it's supposed to feel like it's lifted from a children's book story, right?
It's very Roald Dahlish.
And I feel like that's been removed for a more modern setting.
We can think of a recent example of them trying to do that. Wonka. And they failed. It's ugly as shit. It's not funny. There's no charm. It's not like they hired bad actors. They just didn't provide those actors with any material to work with. And they relied on shitty songs and poor characterization. And then when you watch a movie like this, where you're like, no, you can do heavy themes in a way where you're not like sanding the edges off and being all precious about it.
No.
Like kids can handle stuff. I think let's talk about some themes in this movie, because that's where it gets. The thing that really was a stuck out to me hardcore moment was there's a bull terrier, and I don't know if we ever get his name, but he's one of two guard dogs that end up chasing Babe early on in the film. And the chase ends where they're in front of the hotel where Babe is staying. It's a sort of underground hotel that allows animals to stay there.
Yeah, where like the owner had to pretend that she was kicking out Babe's like one of Babe's owners, only to be like, no, the neighbors do not want us, so just come in here through the back door.
So there's like, and it's also they bring in the canals of like Venice as part of the architecture.
Yes.
And so this guard dog chases Babe to the point where he's hanging by his neck chain that he broke off, and his face first in the water. And this dog is going to drown to death. So like that alone is like a really intense image, because it looks like a real dog. There's a good jumping back and forth between puppets and real dogs here.
Yeah.
And so he's tricking your eye. And Babe, and it's the one thing I love about this is the characterization of Babe is so consistent between movies, as Babe is an honorable, brave pig.
Yeah.
And he's not going to let someone die, even if that person means him harm, because he's a good, I want to say person, right?
Yeah,
Babe
yeah.
is a good person. And so Babe, with his little pig nose, pushes a boat that's on the side of the canal over so that the dog can get up in it. And then this monkey that is working for someone that stays at the hotel undoes the chain. The dog is saved. And afterwards, Babe and this dog are having a conversation. And the Babe is just kind of implying like, and now you'll be a good person, won't you? And the dog is trying to explain his nature of what kind of dog he is. And then the quote that this dog says to Babe in this children's film: "A murderer's shadow lies hard across my soul." And that's how this dog like explains, like, it's in my nature to chase after and want to kill things like you, because that's what I am. If that wasn't enough, Babe, without missing a beat, just looks at this dog and says, "So should I have let you drown?" And like, as an adult, you think about thematically what that's communicating is this idea of, are there people in our society that are just so intent on doing harm that it will be better just to let them die or kill them ourselves? Or, as the movie kind of shows you, is that this character doesn't have to be like that. This character is aggressive, but Babe finds a way for that aggression to be turned into something different.
Yeah.
That is about protecting a community rather than just simply attacking things that enter a territory.
Yeah.
And so that whole dog has his whole little arc there. And it's like that line of dialogue, "A murderer's shadow lies across my soul." That communicates to me how seriously George Miller was taking this movie. That he's like, yeah, it's for kids, but kids deserve something that is beautiful and a piece of art and poetry, right?
Yeah.
Children deserve poetry too.
And then through that dog who's like basically telling everyone that you're supposed to follow what it is that Babe wants, right? And because he's doing that, like there are other dogs that are almost taking advantage, being like, "Oh, we're so hungry, we need a place to live," and he lets them into the hotel. And it's also the vision of all these dogs that are living on the upper floors, looking down, going, "This is a problem. We're letting strays in," and that is the class moment where, like, for the example, the apes had got some food, and Babe's like, "Well, I think there's enough to share for everyone." And at first, they don't want to do it, but then afterwards, they end up sharing all the food with everyone.
Yeah. The class divide thing is so interesting because it's stray dogs and cats, and they belong on the outside. And the animals that live inside the hotel worry about this riffraff coming in.
Yeah.
And by the end of the movie, the hotel animals learn that, well, the world doesn't view you any differently than they view those stray animals. You're all animals to them.
Yeah.
And the one that really stands out to me, where I was like, it almost kind of like choked me up a little bit in the movie, was Thelonious, the orangutan.
Yeah.
Because Mickey Rooney has a very small role in the film as Uncle Fugly, which is the most insane name to give him. Who is like a clown. He doesn't have a single line of dialogue in the movie that I can
No.
remember, and he performs at like a children's hospital, and he brings the apes along. There's Thelonious, and then there's like a trio of chimps. And so Thelonious is always wearing like a full suit that was clearly like tailor made for him or for a child or something.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where animal control shows up at the hotel and they round everybody up, including Thelonious, who has a pet goldfish, which I found was interesting. So he's an animal with a pet. And I think that goldfish to him was like this totem that made him into a human. Like, because I care for an animal, I can't be one, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so he gets taken to this animal shelter.
Despite the fact he's showing submission,
Yeah,
he's
he doesn't
standing
fight
there
back or anything
allowing the humans to take him,
because
but
he
the humans shatter the fishbowl.
thankfully, Babe saves the goldfish. Don't worry. Uh, and so there's this great scene where they're all breaking out of the animal shelter because Babe is able to round up some animals that didn't get caught. And Thelonious will not leave until he puts his clothes back on. And he keeps going, I'm undressed. I'm undressed. I have to put my clothes on.
And everyone's complaining. They're saying it's not
And
natural. They need to leave.
it's like you can feel Thelonious's like shame because he's like, I can't be one of them. And then like they go through the children's hospital and a child acknowledges him as like being a human.
Like he says hello to him and says his full name.
And then the party when he's sitting at the table.
Yeah, and like the woman doesn't realize he's besides him, and then she looks over and starts to scream. And but he can't sink into in the moment because Esme, like our like Farmer Author's wife, is dressed up as Uncle Fugly.
Well, she has this like balloon pants.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's where you get the whole like acrobatics thing. And that's where like Miller, he can do these great moments of like profound, like existential, like philosophy, and they pull your heartstrings in a way that doesn't feel manipulative.
No.
But then you balance it with this like incredible, like slapstick visual comedy.
Yeah, and it's like the actress that plays Esme did so beautifully well. I hope she had the most fun during this film. I hope that
Probably not expecting after her small role in the first movie to ever have anything.
I hope that she is like beloved by the fans because like I do love the relationship between like him and her towards the end because it's like he calls Uncle Fugly himself.
When you say him, you're talking about Thelonious.
Yeah, Thelonious calls Uncle Fugly himself. And he's talking to the other apes, and the other apes are like, that's not himself, that's someone else. But he's like, the essence is there. And so I can trust her. She can take care of me, and I can take care of her. And how, like, I love also, like, within the film, the owner of the hotel isn't angry that the animals got caught. She isn't angry that they snuck in.
She's worried for them.
She's worried for them, and she's angry that the city doesn't love these animals the way that she loves these animals.
Well, and then also living in her hotel, which I thought was a really interesting thing, are the trio of dogs. Because when I really started thinking about that, I'm like, wow, there's like a whole thing to unpack there. Because you have these two dogs that are basically agoraphobes. They're afraid of the outside world.
Yeah.
And they're always coming up with reasons to stay inside. And then you have Flealick, who's disabled. He has one of those like carts on his back legs, and all he wants to do is connect with people and get out. And so it's just
he's blind, he can't smell very well. Like I forgot he was like it was the duck that was with him, and they're like underneath the bed hiding from like animal services.
And he goes,
and the duck's sneezing, and he's like, "There's cats in here. I'm allergic to cats." He's like, "No cats would dare."
And then the camera pulls back, and it's just like 24 cats under the
like
bed.
dozens. And I also love
the cat choir. What the hell was up with that?
Okay, so the mice that are always singing, and then like are like the ones that introduce the chapters.
They stow aboard the suitcase.
They stow aboard, and like what I love is that they're just kind of like, "Oh, what is that beautiful music?" And they see it's the cats, and it's being orchestrated by another cat with its tail, which I thought was fucking genius.
There's like he's so good with like the little visual details,
and like the mice going, "Oh no!"
and then running the hell out of there. But yeah, I'm gonna say I wholeheartedly recommend Babe Pig in the City, especially if you've never seen this movie. It is going to blow your mind. It is going to make you mad that we don't have more children's films this good that like address these themes and have complexity to them. I assume you're also recommending this movie.
Heartedly, like honestly, I think Babe in the City would probably be one of my top 10 favorite films.
I think I am on the verge of saying I think it might be the best children's film I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, that's high praise. I think it might be, no matter.
I've never been very impressed by Disney stuff. Like technically it's okay, and I think the songwriting in Disney movies is always really good, but I just don't emotionally like
it doesn't connect.
Yeah, I'm just like I can recognize the artistry in it, but this was where I was like, no, like this movie is moving me, and I'm like, it wasn't something I expected from Babe Pig in the City. It was something like emotionally
Babe Pig in the
City.
City.
In the fucking city. But yeah, highly recommend Babe Pig in the City. It's an all-timer. Unlike other penguins, Mumble is a gifted tap dancer, which earns him the wrath of the elders of his clan, who send him in exile. Mumble then befriends the Amigos, who help him rediscover himself. That is the basic plot of George Miller's 2006 children's animated, I'm just saying animated film, Happy Feet. Ariana, first off, what were just your general feelings about Happy Feet?
So,
and maybe in comparison to Babe Pig in the City.
Okay, so at the beginning of Happy Feet, I was not enjoying myself. It felt like a jukebox musical.
It is a jukebox musical for sure.
And the problem with it is, unlike Moulin Rouge, it was not a conversation. It was just layer upon layers of like, oh, I know that song, and it just felt like really jumbled and overwhelming. And then suddenly the film shifts when he meets the Amigos. And then slowly but surely, the movie starts to win me over, and I'm starting to get upset because of it. We're got to the point that we were like, wait, what's the plot? Because they kept adding stuff, but in a good way.
We'll talk.
But I think it was better than I anticipated it to be.
I do agree it was better than I anticipated, and you're right. The beginning had me very worried, which I think had to do with the quality of the computer animation. The film extensively uses motion capture, and at the time was probably one of the most advanced uses of that. There were apparently just millions of hours of CPU power used to like what's the word they use to render this film.
Yeah.
Right. However, the textures on the penguins were like nauseating. Like there were some really bad textures, and I think that's maybe just an artifact of the time period.
For me, I had a lot of problems with the textures of like the penguins that have like that Mumble was a part of. Once he met the Amigos,
they're like macaroni penguins, I think.
They looked great.
Stone penguins or something.
Yeah.
Rock penguins. But like the seals, no. When they're trying to do fur, it didn't look good to me. And I know that's like a minor thing. I also think that the lighting had to be just right. Sometimes, and I think they were trying to capture the way the light is in Antarctica because you do have essentially, half a year of light and half a year of not just because of where it is. So there's this really harsh light.
Mhm.
And I don't think that, along with the textures, helped.
No.
Because when they were in darker spaces and the light could be a little moodier, it like the look of the film improved tremendously.
Yeah.
And maybe in like the sequences where there's the big blizzards and like the penguins are walking around in that circle
Hmm.
to keep themselves warm, that looked great.
Yeah.
And I think the less light you had shining on things, the better. Um, Narratively, this film is all over the place.
Yes.
This is like two films,
Yeah, it is
like
mashed into
maybe two and a half,
one.
because when you think about it, there is Mumble and the love story with Gloria. There's also Mumble and his adventures with the Amigos. And then there's Mumble and his relationship with his parents, Memphis and Norma Jean, played by Hugh Jackman and Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
Uh, and these different plots don't like the Gloria plot feels like it wraps up halfway through the movie
Yeah.
when he comes back, and that just feels resolved. So it was really confusing because I just kept thinking, okay, where are we going now? Like, what's the movie? And like by the time he and the Amigos are on this like odyssey across the Antarctic tundra, I remember turning and going, what is the plot? Like, what is the goal? Like, what are we trying to do?
I think it felt as if George Miller was trying to trick you into this movie. Like it felt like he was basically going, "Oh, hey, we're going to start off like this is a common family film. But now we're going to introduce to you the idea of aliens, aka humans abducting these animals." And it's going to explain why there's a lack of fish and why some of them are starving and why some of them have talismans, which is basically like little rings for
Soda cans.
soda cans, get caught on them. And this machinery. Oh, and by the way, like Mumble's gonna get exiled from his group of penguins
Because he dances.
because he dances and he doesn't sing. And then he's gonna get abducted by aliens and he's gonna manage to communicate with them what's going on because of the tap dancing. Because
The scene at the end where an entire colony of penguins is tap dancing in sequence, and there's like the humans that got out of the
helicopter.
helicopter, and I looked at you and I said, "These humans have got to start dancing, right?" And then moments later, that's what happens. And it was one of those where I didn't hate it. I was like, it felt like a fever dream. That's what this movie.
Yes.
This
Oh
movie
my
is so
God.
like. This feels like a movie that if you watched it as a kid and then you're a teenager or a young adult, and you go like, was that movie real or was I
Yeah, it's one
sick
of
when I
those
watched
films
that?
like if it hadn't been like such a big success and as and I think it's also like a mix of is it beloved or not because on Letterboxd it had a 2.9 and then on here I saw like someone gave it a 79%.
Like on Rotten Tomatoes or something.
Yeah, so it's a little confusing as to what the regard is, but it's one that like if it was an underground cult film, if you were to explain the plot, someone would be like, "What the fuck did you smoke?" Or what fever did you watch that you were watching? Were you flipping through three different channels at
Yeah,
the
because
same time?
it feels like Happy Feet and Happy Feet sequel and like another. But there's apparently two more Happy Feet movie, I think.
I
And
did
I
not
think
know
he
that.
wrote and directed the second one. I don't think
Okay.
he's involved in the third one if it exists. So it does have me curious because I've seen people go, "Oh, if you thought the first one was like a mess, you should watch the second one."
Oh my
And I'm
God.
like, "What? What? How could it be?" Uh, I think where George Miller's greatest strengths are in this is in the cinematography of the film, where he chooses to put the camera, how he chooses to block his action. So, like, where characters are going to move within a frame to what point. This, you could really see a lot of the Fury Road in it. When Mumble's being chased underwater, Miller often positions the camera directly in front of Mumble. So Mumble's coming at us, and you can see the seal or the whale behind him.
Yeah.
And that immediately reminded me of the way those scenes are shot in Fury Road, like the big
Yeah.
opening sandstorm chase. Uh, and so like those would like pull me back in, which is rare because in most movies its action sequences kind of like bore me
Mhm.
because they just don't show you anything interesting. It's just kind of hitting beats and like, oh, I've seen visual gags like that before or whatever. But this did feel a little, there was a much more thought put into it. And it's a movie where I can't say I don't like it, but I can't say that I love it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those films that when you're watching it, you can be intrigued by it. It's kind of like Babe, where you can't look away. There's so much going on that you don't end up looking at your phone to just be like, oh, what time is it? I'm gonna check my emails, or I'm gonna send a quick text message. It does engage you in some bizarre ways. I do find it very like the idea of like aliens that are basically like the humans abducting animals and then setting them free. Also, like the sadness of when Mumble does get captured, when he talks to one of the other penguins, and the penguin is like, try the water,
Oh,
Dave.
yeah.
It's really great. And you start to realize like that penguin has gone insane, and he starts having like
Hallucinate waking
hallucinations
dreams
because
kind of.
he's eating and he sees his family, and it's like, it's okay, you should eat, and he's like, no, there's enough food for everyone, and it's this heartbreaking thing where he is slamming fish against the wall trying to get this imaginary version of his family and friends to eat that he knows they're starving.
But you're talking about like the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Yes.
And that's where it's a long journey to get there. It's great when we get there. Like I would say the last third of this movie, I wouldn't change a thing. I think it's pretty solid. But the journey to get to that place is so all over the place. Like the opening sequence of this movie is so disorienting.
Because there's
It
so
does
many.
not like guide you into this world. It's just,
No.
hey, look, it's penguins. And then they're singing like fucking Prince songs and shit. And you're
Yeah.
like, what's going on? And the movie kind of explains it. The thing that I don't understand within the rules of this movie, and this is such like a nitpicky thing when you're probably just supposed to have, uh, you know, suspension of disbelief. But it's clear that these penguins aren't having direct contact with humans, hence why they view them as aliens. And it makes sense. Antarctic animals do not live in environments where humans are commonplace. So when they do encounter humans, it has to be a strange experience for them.
Yeah.
It's an organism they don't have a frame of reference for. And so I thought that was very clever, where the seagull who's been tagged around his leg is describing it as if he was abducted by aliens and probed or something, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but then how do they know all these songs? Because these are songs that exist in the human world. They're human songs. And the film never really gives any kind of fictional justification for
No,
this.
it's supposed to be like
And
their
I,
heart song, and it's just like
but
that's
how
the
do they
way.
know them though? That's the
I have
thing.
no idea. It's supposed to be just like it's something that they can hear within like their chest.
Well, because I wondered at the beginning of the movie, it starts in outer space and you're hearing the songs as if they're being broadcast,
Yeah.
but then the camera like zooms in on Earth to Antarctica, and I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be visually communicating something to me, but I've never heard anything about, penguins being like living radio receivers. Maybe they are, and that's just a fact about penguins I don't know. But that was so odd to me
Well, I think
because
it's also
humans are
like
such a part of the movie. That's if humans had not shown up, then I would have been like, oh, it's just kind of like a fictional conceit. But there are humans there, and these are human songs.
I think it has to do with the elders, which is so fucked up that we're trying to explain Happy Feet
The Happy Feet lore.
lore. Because like the elders
They do know more.
they do know more, and I think it's supposed to be they've encountered humans, they just don't want to talk about humans to their people because it's going to lead them to believe like that to just give up or just hope that these humans take care of these things that they won't. But it is at the beginning with all the singing, with all the different songs.
It's a lot.
It's so disoriented until like Mumble ends up with the amigos. And I kind of like that idea, but because even then they're like, oh, well, you can dance, we can dance, but that's so cool the way you dance.
Yeah.
And how like, oh, he's getting through like this acceptance thing. And
When they don't sing, which I like that of the idea of, oh, just because the culture you come from does something doesn't mean everybody does that.
yeah, and it's like this also interesting thing that when they do sing, it's like in a response to something. It is a response to someone's sadness, or it's a quippy reply to what's going on. And they all get together to help like Mumble like win over Gloria, even though it's like later on he rejects her, which is like it's an interesting premise, like him just being like, oh, you think you're so great, but I have something else that I want to go do, and I don't want you tagging along. And it was a movie that you almost wanted it to be more about him building up this friendships and then dealing with the aliens, but there's so much going on.
Yeah, I think that's the weakest part of the movie is it wants to be a love story. It wants to be a story about the environment. It wants to be a story about an outcast finding his place in
Yeah, it
community.
wants to be about like the dad not accepting him and forcing him to like to do what everyone else is doing.
And like there are moments where each of these plots has like strong scenes,
Yeah.
but like especially the Gloria love story, I did not find like compelling in any way.
No.
It felt very formulaic to me.
Mhm.
And it's essentially I realized like, oh, this is just Rudolph with penguins.
Yeah.
When you look at just the overall story structure and the way, oh, it's someone who's born with an ability that makes them different, and they kind of go out in this odyssey and meet these, ragtag group of friends, and they find that their gift is that the thing they thought was a liability is actually a gift. Because you touched on a lot of things there. We'll talk about the Amigos. I thought they did very good as comedy relief, but were still interesting characters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Robin Williams, of course, he does dual roles where he plays Ramon, one of the
Yeah.
Amigos, but he also plays Lovelace, who's the head of that like penguin
Isn't he
tribe.
also the narrator?
I think he might be. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it sounded like his voice. Um, but I think the Lovelace character was interesting to me because it showed another element of the environmental theme in there. Because you were mentioned before, he has the like 6 plastic rings that they use for soda in the United States, and he has one of them around his neck, and talks about it as if it's his talisman, and he can communicate with the great spirits with it.
Yeah.
And eventually, like that becomes a whole subplot. The movie spends like a lot of time on is he's choking to death on this.
Yeah,
So they
because
go
he
on
got
this
too fat.
because they go on this journey to like cut it off of him.
Yes.
Um, and that creates this like intense bond between Lovelace and Mumble,
Hmm.
our main character. And the scene where Mumble decides he is going to go single-handedly go after the humans, and no one else is going to have to risk anything, and he plunges off that like iceberg.
Hmm.
And Lovelace's, I forget the exact quote, but he's just like, I will remember you, Mumble, and I will tell your story. And like that was like it was both a scene where there was humor in it, but there was also like a genuine connection between these characters. Like
Yeah.
Lovelace could easily be some kind of like Jabba the Hutt villain, or he could easily just be like shallow comedy relief. But he actually felt like a real character who you liked after a while. You were like,
Yeah.
oh, he's not like a bad guy.
And I think it's also like that orca scene with all of them was so good.
That's where like the action sequences, that's George Miller excels at that. The orcas, once again, that was another instance where like it didn't always look great depending on the lighting and the
But
angle.
the movements,
But then when it did look good, I was like, those
oh,
look like real killer whales.
yeah, like the movements were something that I was really surprised by. And I think we also talked a lot like about how the close-ups were not great, but the wide shots.
Yeah,
The wide shots, if somebody were like, oh, just snapped one of the wide shots, it's like, oh, these are penguins, I'd barely be like, yeah, yeah, that's real.
like photograph quality.
Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah.
like especially like the water scene when he go plunges away.
I
We
re-
were kind of
yeah.
like, oh shit, that water.
Yeah, when the way the camera tracks over the water. And that was one of those where I was like, oh, wow, you can really see. And it's one of those where like, is it real water or is it CG water? Like, and I couldn't tell the difference at
No.
a certain point. I couldn't. But once again, it was those animal like feather and fur textures. That's where the movie revealed like what was real and what wasn't. where he gets taken to the zoo or aquarium, wherever it is that he's put. I did feel that was really emotionally effective, especially the way they chose to show how animals lose their minds. It's almost an anti-Finding Nemo.
Yeah.
And the way Finding Nemo presents the captive fish is they're still okay, right? They're
Uh-huh.
not like mentally ill. Like here it was, no, when you don't allow when you put a penguin in an artificial version of their environment and they're not able to be part of a colony that's the size and scale that they've evolved to be in, they will lose their minds. And I
Yeah.
mean, you've heard stories about like dolphins who've, held their breath and killed themselves in captivity.
Yeah.
So I do like that they included that bit of, locking these animals up so we can look at them is not good. It hurts them in the long run. It
Hmm.
doesn't where they're supposed to be. I like that they used real humans in the movie rather than like a Pixar movie where you would animate them
Yeah.
because it was just a visual choice that made the film a little more interesting to look at.
I think it also makes this interesting thing where like penguins could recognize each other as different, even if they're from the same species, and have like they could differentiate each other, but when they were like the humans would not be able to see that because they're not part of that world.
Uh, the so one of my questions about this movie is this a children's animated movie?
Oh, I kind of think it is, but I think it's also trying to trick the parents into thinking it's a
Or is it like a really good family film?
I think it's a good family film.
Because it doesn't feel like a movie you just put on and your kids would be distracted by it. I mean, the dancing scenes, I can only imagine how popular this movie was at the time it came out on DVD for like parties in gymnasiums and elementary schools, right?
Yeah.
Like you put on a scene where they're dancing and singing.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of hard because I know like you said that they use motion captured with an actual dancer.
Well, Savion Glover, I think, performs Mumble's body in the
Yeah.
movie.
And it was kind of hard to enjoy the dancing because you can't really see like the way that you would actually see a tap dancer.
Well, there's no legs.
Yeah, there's no legs, and so we all we hear is really the tapping, so I could not appreciate it as much as I wanted
There
to.
was like a lot of penguin foot close-ups for the
Yeah.
fetishists who are into
Yeah.
that shit.
But like when it's further away and they're like doing like movements with their bodies and with the tapping, that worked a bit better. It also worked better when it was felt like more of a what's it called when it's like all together, it's a group
Like a
choreography.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. But when it was just him, it just was a hard sell up until, and it was probably also just being like, no, this will look cooler when you have a group of penguins doing the same thing. Because all I could think is when he was like tap dancing, I was like, I've seen this in Mary Poppins, and it was much more impressive on Mary Poppins. But Mary
Oh
Poppins,
yeah, the
yeah.
penguins. Yeah, I liked. One thing I thought of when we were talking is the elephant seals. They're not in the movie for a long time.
They're
That was texture that was rendered really well. I thought
yes, like
they looked realistic,
like the way they move their mouths, and I think it would
and they're like
make
weird trunk nose thing
yes,
was
but I
really
think
good.
it's also he was being very particular on how certain animals move their mouths, so they looked really good. And some of us might get hung up on the way like the penguins move their mouths, but he was being realistic of like, well, it's going to be the motion that it is.
It's just like a beak.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of movement. Like they're saying words that couldn't form with their mouths the way they move them.
Yeah.
But that is one of those where you just kind of go with the movie.
Yeah, and I feel like he respects it on those angles. It's obviously a movie about the environment. It is a movie that is like not set in our reality, which kind of makes me wonder what the second version was, because in this one it was implying that like Happy Feet by dancing in front of these humans were like we're going to stop fishing and we're going to move the fishing over here. So what is
Well, they just kill another species by overfishing there. Uh, it was the idea for this movie apparently came to Miller while he was shooting Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior.
Mhm.
So you remember that one?
Yeah.
Humongous, I believe, is the villain. They've surrounded the fort.
Yeah, it's Mad Max 2
So
is
it's
basically what
1981
yeah, it's
is
Mad Max 2 is what everyone thinks is Mad Max 1 if you
yeah.
don't know about the
And the
whole
first Mad Max is like it's okay. It's not
yeah.
bad, but the sequel's so much better. So he was apparently taking a break. And he met what he referred to as this grizzled old cameraman
Yeah.
whose father was a part of the Admiral Shackleton expedition to Antarctica,
Uh-huh.
which I think was like the first to reach the South Pole, if I remember my
Okay.
history right. And so this cameraman told Miller, you should make a movie set in Antarctica because it's such a unique and interesting looking environment. And so Miller was like, wow, one day I want to make a movie that's set in Antarctica. Like maybe we'll film there, maybe we won't be able to, but I want to think about this. And then it's odd because I found that Miller has been very involved in like environmental activism. It's a big theme in all his movies. Like even
Yeah.
Mad Max is about like how humans destroy the environment. But the thing that I could not find any information on is why this is a musical. Like I know why it's Antarctica. I know why there's these environmental themes, but I don't know why there's all of these songs in the movie. And I get that it's because well penguins have songs and that's how they identify each other. But I didn't think pop music, like how do we get there and why these songs?
Yeah, I feel like as if somebody gave him the idea, like, well, what if like when you're there, it just sounds like you're switching over different radio stations all the time. And
I think it's because these were available in the Warner Brothers music
of
catalog.
course.
That's the main reason why these
And
songs are in this movie.
and like it's this weird thing that like for me, the voice actors were good, but I was a little bit distracted with Nicole Kidman's like Norma Jean like breathy thing. I almost wished because I kept thinking, oh yeah, that's Nicole Kidman, and that's
Well,
like
they're supposed to be Elvis and Marilyn Monroe, right? Like that's
okay,
Memphis and Norma Jean. So it's like this is the child of Elvis and Marilyn Monroe.
okay. I kind of wish they'd gone a different route with that. I It was a little distracting for me.
The there is like a pretty decent moment where near the end of the movie that does involve the Mumble and his father subplot,
Yeah,
where he finally has this moment with his father who's treated him very cruelly through
yeah,
the movie. His father very much wanting to conform with the rest of the colony and the elders. And then when Mumble is finally going there to invite his father to be a part of this dance that they're going to do. And like Hugh Jackman delivers the hell out of the line where he just goes, something like, I've never done right by you for one day of your life, boy. And it's like you're like, oh wow, like to see a father like admit that to his son
yeah,
and delivered in a way that the line really hits the point, but in a like somebody thought about how to say that, right? In the same
yeah.
way that line from Babe Pig in the City about the murderer's shadow across his soul, right? And so it's Miller, he does really think about like the voices of his characters. He thinks about how they can say things that aren't just blunt,
Yeah.
that there's a poetry to the way people speak.
I think a lot of times what it feels like with the especially like the family films that we've watched with George Miller, it is he's almost cramming in as much as possible, even though for someone like me with Happy Feet, I was like, this would do better being like a mini series of sorts when I think about all the stuff that he's trying to include in there. But I also understand that he's almost like telling children, this is how your life will feel like. There's a lot of things going on, and then boom, you're an adult, and now you have to make your own choices.
But I do feel like it felt episodic. Like when we
Yeah.
get to the halfway point, it felt like we were done with episode one of Happy Feet, and now we were on episode two.
Yeah. I was just, it's, it's hard because it's like again when I started the film I really was not enjoying it and then it was winning me over, and now that we talk about it it's not that I'm first set in the first feeling, it's just it was
It's a mixed bag.
yeah, it's so much, there's so many little things that make it better than you expected, but there's so much that feels like was left undone because there was so much of it. Like you're just kind of like,
They
okay,
bit off too much.
yeah, it's sort of like, all right, you're gonna make the mom being like the one that accepts him more. Well, could we have a little bit more scenes with the mom being that? Or develop a little bit more different things on how the dad didn't do right by him, except just being like, you need to conform, blah blah blah. Like,
Yeah, the characters were painted with such broad strokes.
yes, and then like Brittany Murphy, who did Gloria, had a great singing voice.
I think that was her singing. I don't know.
And but it was so little of her character because he's just like, which made sense. He's like, I have something more important to do. And I love that when he comes back from like being in the zoo or aquarium, whatever he is, he's confronted with Gloria and they're making you seem like Gloria has had children with this other dude, but I don't know what if they did have like
No, I don't think so. I don't know. Like
it happened so
there was
quickly.
so much stuff in
Yeah,
this movie.
and I love the fact that he's like, "Yeah, that's great. You're someone else, guys. The aliens are gonna come within a few minutes."
I do think Robin Williams is the MVP of this movie.
He did so many voices. He did so much going on, and like stuff that he would not be allowed to get away with now, because Lovelace is kind of like black voice
Yeah, and
preacher.
Ramon is clearly
Ramon is kind
Latino.
of like a Latino versus the rest of the amigos are voiced by a Latino cast.
Carlos Alazraqui, who did
Yes.
Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life.
But it's like it's stuff that he would not be able to get away
Yeah,
with
they would
now.
not cast him in these roles. But would you recommend Happy Feet?
I mean, it's not bad. What would you say?
I would say if it's a movie, if you like pop music from like the 80s and the 60s a little bit, kind of,
It's a mixed bag
yeah.
because there's also
If you
like,
like jukebox musicals, if you don't really care too much about a very streamlined plot, and if you like Robin Williams, I think
yeah.
you should see it. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check out our show notes for any relevant links to things we might have mentioned, including to our website, popcult.blog. Also, make sure that you subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes of this show are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you'll find that we're here in February, right around the middle of it, and we have been doing a Movies About Movies series, so watching films about different aspects of filmmaking. Coming up in this next week, we're going to be reviewing the film The Player, directed by Robert Altman, In the Soup, starring Steve Buscemi, and Olivier Assayas, I think is how you pronounce his name, his film Irma Vep, which I've always heard very, very positive things about. Next week on our podcast, we are going to be doing a Powell and Pressburger double feature, the two very famous British filmmakers. We're going to be looking at two of their World War II movies, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, followed by A Matter of Life and Death. So very aptly named. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on popcult.blog, we would ask you to consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the show notes. I want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt. They donate at the writer's room level, which gets them the ability to pick one movie a month for us to watch and review. If you do that, you can include your thoughts on that review as well. No matter what level you donate at the Patreon, you will get access to our patron exclusive podcast. We've got a few series up there now. We've got a new series coming up in March, which will be a GM-less tabletop role play we're going to be doing. So if those sound like things that are exciting to you, check out our Patreon. Think about donating. Well, until next time, you keep listening. We'll keep watching.